My name is Emma, and just a few weeks ago I was navigating the fragile landscape of recovery. My body still a tender roadmap of incisions after major surgery. At 42, I thought I understood the contours of my life. A stable marriage, a comfortable home, and a family I'd always fiercely protected. Especially Melissa, my younger sister, who'd arrived on our doorstep years ago, broken and directionless, and whom I'd taken in without a second thought, offering not just a room but a lifeline, a job, and the kind of unwavering support only a big sister can give. They, David and Melissa, my husband and my sister, believed they had outsmarted me with a meticulously calculated plan to steal everything. They were wrong. This is the story of how I unearthed their betrayal, exposed their treachery to my entire family, and, piece by agonizing piece, reclaimed my life. That Tuesday, I was supposed to be at Olivia's, my best friend's house, still recuperating. But a sudden wave of nausea had me yearning for my own bed, my own space. I'd texted David, letting him know I was coming home early, expecting him to be engrossed in his usual evening sports. The drive felt longer than usual, my body still protesting every bump and turn, a dull ache throbbing where the surgeons had worked their magic. As I pulled into our driveway, a sense of quiet solitude washed over me. The house was dark, save for a single thin sliver of light beneath our bedroom door. A detail that, in retrospect, should have screamed warning. I let myself in quietly, my movements slow and deliberate. A habit born from weeks of tender healing. The air inside was heavy, thick with a scent I couldn't quite place, something cloying and sickly sweet. My heart, still fragile from the procedure, began an unsteady drumbeat against my ribs. I walked towards the bedroom, calling out David's name softly, my voice hoarse from disuse. No answer. The sliver of light widened slightly as I pushed the door open, just a crack. And then, my world fractured. There, bathed in the soft glow of the bedside lamp, were David and Melissa, naked, entwined, in my time's bed, the familiar floral duvet, the one I'd chosen, now crumpled beneath their entangled limbs. Time ceased to exist. My breath hitched. A silent guttural scream lodged in my throat. Every nerve ending in my body, already frayed from surgery, ignited with a firestorm of ice. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an amputation. A violent tearing of my very identity. The faces, once so beloved and trusted, were contorted in a grotesque pantomime of intimacy. Melissa's head nestled against David's chest, her pale hair fanned across my pillow. David's eyes, usually so dismissive of me, were now heavy-lidded with a primal desire I'd never seen directed my way. My mind raced, a terrifying whirlwind of shock, disbelief, and a cold, calculating fury. But my body remained eerily still, a statue carved from frozen grief. I didn't make a sound, I didn't move. I simply stood there, a phantom at the threshold of my shattered life, absorbing the devastating tableau. The icy waste in my veins spread, numbing the pain, sharpening my focus. The physical shock was immense, a blow far harder than any surgery. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from a desperate need for oxygen that felt suddenly withheld. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, I retracted, slowly, silently, closing the bedroom door with the same stealth with which I'd opened it. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected, yet they moved with a mechanical precision born of pure instinct. I walked through the house, past the photographs of our shared life, now mocking testaments to a lie. The front door clicked shut behind me. Not a slam of rage, but a quiet, final closing. My mind was a maelstrom of thoughts, accusations, and a terrifying sense of emptiness, but my body, against all odds, continued to operate, pulling me away from the ruins of my home, away from the two people who had just stolen everything, including my peace. My car, a familiar extension of my fractured self, somehow navigated the winding streets towards Olivia's apartment. Each turn felt like a lurch into an unknown future. The recent surgery a distant throb compared to the searing pain in my soul. I don't remember the drive, only the desperate clawing need to reach my anchor. Olivia, my best friend since college. A woman whose legal mind was as sharp as her wit. Whose loyalty had always been my unwavering North Star. I burst through her door, not with a sob, but with a guttural gasp that ripped from the deepest part of my chest. Olivia, already alerted by my incoherent, breathless voicemail, took one look at my ashen face, the wildness in my eyes, and pulled me into a silent embrace. There were no questions, no platitudes, just her steady presence. David, Melissa, my bed, I choked out, the words tasting like ash and bile. They were, together. Olivia's arms tightened around me. I know, Emma. I heard enough. Sit down. Take a breath. She steered me to her couch, pressing a glass of water into my trembling hand. Her face, usually so animated, was a mask of grave determination. First rule: do not confront them. Not yet. Do not utter a single word about what you saw. My jaw clenched. But I want to scream, Olivia. I want to rip them apart. They're still in my house. Probably still in my bed. The urge to return, to unleash a hurricane of rage, was almost unbearable. A physical ache behind my eyes. Every fiber of my being screamed for retribution, for the satisfaction of seeing their faces crumble. And that's exactly what they want you to do. Olivia's voice was firm, cutting through my emotional storm. Don't give them the satisfaction. Don't give them a single shred of leverage. Any emotional outburst, any confrontation, gives them an opening to twist the narrative, to accuse you of being unstable, to start hiding assets. We play this cold, Emma, calculated. This isn't a lover's quarrel. This is a war, and we need intelligence and strategy. She began to rapid-fire instructions, her legal brain already shifting into gear. First, your finances. Tonight, go online, freeze every joint account, every credit card. Set up alerts for any suspicious activity. Divert your next paycheck into your personal savings account, the one you had before David. Do not move large sums out of joint accounts. Just protect what's coming in and prevent them from draining what's there. That's hiding assets. We're securing assets. Subtle difference. Massive legal impact. My head spun, but her words were a lifeline in the chaos. Second, the house. We need to change the locks. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. I'll call a locksmith I trust. Tell him it's an emergency. You'll give him access. But I can't go back there, I whispered, the thought of re-entering that tainted space making my stomach churn. You don't have to, Olivia reassured me. We'll arrange it for when they're out. The key is swift, silent action. While you're doing that online, think about any vital documents. Passports, birth certificates, car titles, wills. Where are they? Do you have digital copies? Get them secured, either physically or electronically. She handed me her laptop, already open to a secure browser. Start here, your bank, log in. Change passwords too, everything. Email, social media. Assume they've been in everything. The next few hours were a blur of clicks and passwords, each action a tiny hammer blow against the fortress of their deceit. My fingers flew across the keyboard, driven by a primal need for self-preservation. Freezing the joint credit card David used so lavishly for his business lunches and Melissa's shopping emergencies felt like a small, satisfying victory. Redirecting my salary, the one I'd earned with my own sweat and skill, felt like reclaiming a piece of my stolen dignity. With each secured account, a tiny sliver of control returned, pushing back the overwhelming tide of helplessness. The hardest part, Olivia warned, would be maintaining the facade. You have to pretend nothing happened, act normal. Engage with them if you have to, but keep it superficial. Don't let them see the crack in your armor. They need to believe they've gotten away with it, that you're none the wiser, until we're ready to strike. Pretend. The word echoed in my mind, a chilling command. How could I pretend to love a man who had desecrated our bed, our vows, our life, with my own sister. How could I look at Melissa, the sister I had raised, clothed, and championed, without seeing the viper she was? It would be the most agonizing performance of my life, but as the ice continued to spread through my veins, dulling the emotional pain, a new strength began to solidify. This wasn't about screaming anymore. It was about methodical surgical dismantling. My silent plan had begun. The ice Olivia spoke of had indeed spread. But it wasn't merely dulling the pain. It was clearing a path, sharpening a focus. As I methodically secured my digital life, a chilling clarity began to form. Like shards of shattered glass rearranging themselves into a grim mosaic. It wasn't just the image of David and Melissa, stark and sickening, that haunted me. It was the sudden, horrifying relevance of 100 small moments, dismissed at the time as quirks, stresses, or simply David's ambition and Melissa's fragility. David, for instance, had been unusually cheerful these past few months, almost giddy. I'd attributed it to a new client he'd landed, a fresh spark in our routine. Now, I saw the smugness, the thinly veiled excitement of a man on the cusp of a major score. He'd also become subtly critical of my spending, despite my generous income, and increasingly insistent that we use my recent inheritance to pay down the mortgage on our apartment faster. "It's about securing our time's future, Emma," he'd purr, his hand on my knee, a gesture I now recognized as a viper's coil. He'd pushed hard for me to take the recent promotion that came with a significant salary bump, feigning pride, while perhaps seeing it only as an additional stream of income for their nefarious scheme. And Melissa, my sweet, needy sister. She had practically moved in permanently since my surgery, citing a desire to help me recover, but always with an odd, watchful intensity in her eyes. She'd always been a bottomless pit of need. But lately, her requests had become bolder, her presence more pervasive. She'd often offer unsolicited advice on my investments, always steering me towards options David had also casually mentioned. I'd seen it as her finally taking an interest in her own financial future, guided by her savvy brother-in-law. How foolish I'd been, mistaking predatory intent for shared concern. The memory of David laughing off a minor argument I'd had with Melissa, calling me overly sensitive post-surgery, twisted in my gut. He'd always championed her, always sided with her, framing her as the innocent, vulnerable one who needed our protection. I'd seen it as his big-heartedness. Now, it was clear. He was protecting his accomplice. The subtle gaslighting, the constant undermining of my perspective, the way they would subtly exchange glances across the dinner table. All of it had been there, red flags I'd either ignored or rationalized away with the boundless generosity of a loving wife and sister. The initial white-hot shock of betrayal had begun to cool, hardening into something far more dangerous, a cold, clinical suspicion. This wasn't just a passionate, ill-advised affair. This had the stench of something premeditated, something ugly and calculated. The pieces, once scattered and meaningless, were starting to click into place, forming a picture that horrified me far more than the sight of their naked bodies. I had been a victim of infidelity, yes, but that felt like a surface wound compared to the festering realization that I had been, for months, perhaps even years, a carefully cultivated target. My heart, still throbbing from the physical trauma of surgery, now ached with a deeper, more profound wound. The realization that the people I loved most had been systematically dismantling my life from the inside, not out of passion, but out of greed. The grief I felt for my shattered marriage and sisterly bond was now being eclipsed by a chilling resolve. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was being played, and the game, I realized with a fierce, quiet certainty, was far from over. The next morning, a thin tendril of sunlight pierced through Olivia's blinds, but it brought no warmth to the Arctic landscape of my heart. While Olivia was out grabbing coffee, my eyes fell upon David's tablet, which he often left charging at her place after our joint visits. It lay abandoned on her coffee table, its screen a dark mirror reflecting the turmoil within me. A morbid curiosity, a hunter's instinct now fully awakened, compelled me. I picked it up, and with a familiar swipe of my finger, it unlocked. He'd never bothered to change the password, a testament to his arrogance, or perhaps his utter carelessness, given his current preoccupation. The screen flickered to life, displaying not his usual sports scores or work emails, but an open document. The title, stark and chilling, seared itself into my vision. The plan. My breath hitched. A fresh wave of nausea washing over me. Far worse than anything the surgery had produced. My fingers, still trembling from the previous night's revelations, clutched the device as if it might explode. I began to read, my eyes scanning the text, each word a venomous dart piercing through the last vestiges of my innocence. It was a timeline, a flowchart, a meticulously detailed roadmap of my destruction. Phase 1. Emma's inheritance integration. Objective: persuade Emma to invest her recent inheritance, approx. $300K, into our apartment mortgage acceleration program. Frame as securing our future. Target completion. End of Q2. Phase 2. Salary diversion. Objective: encourage Emma to accept promotion, increasing her net income. Strategically suggest using new salary to cover household expenses, allowing David's income to be invested into joint ventures, for example, shell accounts divided by investments in Melissa's name. Target completion. Q3. Phase 3. Equity extraction. Objective: upon full mortgage payment, using Emma's funds, initiate divorce proceedings. Leverage Emma's emotional instability post-surgery divided by affair discovery, if necessary, to minimize her claim to apartment equity. Target outcome: David retains 75% of apartment value. Emma's inheritance effectively absorbed. Melissa's bonus structure contingent on successful execution. My vision blurred, then sharpened with a terrifying clarity. It was all there, laid out in bullet points and projected financial outcomes, the casual suggestions about paying down the mortgage, David's feigned pride in my promotion, Melissa's sudden interest in my finances. They weren't random acts of love or support, they were calculated steps in a cold, brutal strategy. My inheritance, my hard-earned salary, the equity in the home I had helped build, all targeted for systematic theft. This wasn't just a passionate, ill-advised affair born of momentary weakness. This was a sophisticated, premeditated financial fraud. An elaborate scheme concocted by the two people I had trusted most in the world. The heartbroken victim, the woman who had collapsed into Olivia's arms, was incinerated in that moment. In her place, a cold, unyielding entity arose. The ice Olivia had spoken of wasn't just dulling the pain. It was crystallizing my resolve, hardening every cell in my body into a weapon. My hands, which had trembled earlier, now gripped the tablet with a steady, lethal precision. My breath, once shallow and ragged, deepened into a slow, controlled rhythm. The raw, gut-wrenching pain of betrayal transmuted into a searing, righteous fury, a fire that burned away all doubt and fear. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was being played for a fool, but now I had the playbook. I had the blueprint of their deceit, written in their own words, confirming every chilling suspicion that had begun to fester in my mind. This was not merely proof of infidelity. It was irrefutable evidence of a calculated conspiracy. My emotional transformation was complete. I was no longer a casualty of their treachery, but a vengeful, strategic opponent, armed with the undeniable truth. The game, as I had surmised, was far from over. In fact, it had just truly begun. And with this document in my hands, I held the winning hand. With David's tablet still clutched in my hand, its chilling blueprint of betrayal searing into my mind, I barely registered the click of the door as Olivia re-entered with our coffees. My transformation was complete, my resolve an unyielding steel. The moment her eyes met mine, a silent understanding passed between us. I thrust the device into her hands, pointing to the horrifying text, My voice, though still calm, was laced with an urgency she instantly recognized. "Read this, Liv." Every single word. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the screen, her lawyer's mind absorbing the data, cross-referencing, dissecting. I watched her face, usually so composed, contort with a mixture of disbelief and utter disgust. "Emma," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "This is beyond anything I could have imagined. This isn't just infidelity. This is grand theft, premeditated fraud. This is a goldmine for us." We spent the next several hours meticulously poring over the plan, Olivia explaining the legal nuances of each chilling bullet point. We documented every screenshot, every page, ensuring an impeccable digital and physical trail. "This document," she emphasized, tapping the screen, "is your ironclad shield and your deadliest weapon. It exposes their intent, their calculation. It makes their defense." It was a moment of passion. Emma was unstable, crumble to dust. She outlined how we would present it, not as circumstantial evidence, but as the very blueprint of their conspiracy, detailing how it would strip David of any claim to marital assets, potentially even land Melissa in legal trouble for aiding and abetting. The sheer audacity of their scheme, laid bare in their own words, continued to fuel the cold fire within me. They weren't just taking my money. They were attempting to erase my financial autonomy, to leave me vulnerable and dependent. Post-surgery, no less. The detail about leveraging my emotional instability, post-affair discovery, designed to minimize my claim to the apartment equity, was a particularly vicious jab. It was a preemptive strike, a psychological warfare tactic they'd planned long before I ever stumbled upon their sordid secret. But knowing their strategy was empowering. Now, their planned manipulations would be my strengths. Olivia transitioned seamlessly from legal strategy to psychological preparation. "This is going to be incredibly difficult, Emma. They will try to provoke you, to make you lose your temper. David will beg, Melissa will play the victim. Your parents might even try to mediate. But you cannot, under any circumstances, waver. Your composure is your power. Every tear, every raised voice, every emotional outburst they elicit, is a win for them." I took a deep breath, picturing the scenario in my mind. "So, I become a machine?" "No," Olivia corrected gently. "You become an actress. A very convincing one. You'll feel the rage, the pain, the injustice. But you will not show it. Not until it's strategic. We rehearse. For days, we practiced. I would sit across from Olivia, who would role-play David's blustering denial or Melissa's tearful apologies, or my parents' attempts to soften the blow. I learned to breathe through the knots in my stomach, to maintain eye contact, to deliver my planned statements in a calm, measured tone. "I have evidence," I'd say, my voice steady, "that goes far beyond a simple affair." Each rehearsal chipped away at my raw nerves, replacing them with steel. The hurt was still a deep, aching void, but it was now encased in layers of strategic resolve. Every time I felt the urge to scream, I reminded myself of David's condescending hand on my knee, Melissa's hungry eyes on my inheritance. That cold logic of revenge, mingled with the profound, burning hurt, was my constant fuel. Beyond the plan, we painstakingly gathered every piece of supplementary evidence. I transferred the photos of David and Melissa from my phone to Olivia's secure server. We printed out bank statements, highlighting every suspicious transfer, every lavish expenditure by David or Melissa that drained our joint accounts. We meticulously checked my call logs and message history, searching for any unusual patterns of communication between them. Olivia even had me retrieve my old personal journals, hoping to find casual mentions of conversations or events that, in retrospect, would expose their long-game deception. It felt like assembling a dossier for a criminal trial, which, in essence, it was. The profound sense of betrayal still resonated deep within me, a constant, dull throb. But it was no longer paralyzing. It was a catalyst. Each piece of evidence secured, each mental rehearsal completed, was a step towards reclaiming not just my assets, but my dignity, my self-worth. I was no longer Emma, the trusting wife and generous sister. I was Emma, the strategist, the survivor, meticulously constructing the downfall of those who sought to destroy me. The game had indeed begun, and I was armed, prepared, and ready to play. The game had indeed begun, and I was armed, prepared, and ready to play. The quiet hum of Olivia's apartment, where I'd found refuge and forged my battle plan, was suddenly pierced by the insistent trill of my phone. It was my mother. Her voice, usually a blend of gentle affection and subtle anxiety, was now carefully modulated. A tone I recognized instantly, the prelude to a family discussion where my feelings would inevitably be sidelined. "Emma, darling," she began, the sweetness almost cloying. "Your father and I have been so worried about you," David called. "He said you've been distant. And Melissa's very upset." My stomach clenched. "Upset about what, Mom?" I asked, my voice a marvel of feigned innocence, honed by days of rehearsal with Olivia. "Well, about everything, dear. David's just so distressed about your sudden changes. Freezing accounts, changing locks. It's all very unlike you. Especially after your surgery. We just think it would be best if we all sat down. As a family. This Friday. For dinner. To clear the air." The invitation hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. A family meeting. A tribunal, as Olivia had aptly called it. They weren't inviting me for comfort. They were summoning me for an intervention. My recent behavior was the problem. Not David's betrayal, or Melissa's calculated cruelty. This was their playbook, dusty and well-worn. For years, any familial discord, any uncomfortable truth, had been swept under the rug with the force of a gale. My parents, always keen on maintaining the illusion of a perfect family, were masters of gaslighting, of dismissing my legitimate grievances as overreacting or being too sensitive. Melissa, with her perpetual victimhood, had always been their blind spot, indulged and excused regardless of her actions. And David, the charismatic son-in-law, had seamlessly integrated into this dynamic, his manipulative charm reinforcing their belief in his inherent goodness. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. They thought they were bringing me to justice, to humble me, to coerce me back into their carefully constructed narrative of peace and harmony. They wanted to discuss times my times behavior. They wanted to make times me times the problem, the emotionally unstable woman fresh out of surgery, lashing out unfairly at her loving husband and fragile sister. This wasn't an olive branch, it was a carefully baited trap, designed to restore their version of order. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. This time, I had the truth, solid and undeniable, clutched in my fist. This time, their tribunal would be my stage, the raw, desperate hunger for justice, once a firestorm, now burned with a cold, focused intensity. Every dismissal, every subtle slight, every instance where my feelings had been invalidated by my family flooded my memory, coalescing into an unshakable resolve. This was my chance not just to expose David and Melissa, but to finally shatter the toxic family dynamics that had stifled me for decades. No more allowing them to control the narrative. No more being the quiet, compliant Emma. "Friday? Dinner?" I repeated, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "Yes, Mom. That sounds wonderful. I'd love to clear the air." My acceptance seemed to surprise her. A beat of silence on the line before her relieved sigh. "Oh, good, darling. That's a good girl. Your father will be so pleased. Good girl." The phrase, a relic from childhood, grated. But I let it pass. They thought they were luring a wounded animal into a corner. They thought they were the arbiters, the judges, the ones in control. But as I hung up the phone, a profound sense of power settled over me, a feeling both chilling and exhilarating. They were indeed setting a trap. But they were sorely mistaken about who the prey was. I was walking into their lair. Yes, but not as a lamb. I was the hunter, armed with irrefutable evidence, and Friday dinner was about to become the most important and most satisfying performance of my life. I arrived at my parents' house exactly at 7, the hour of their proposed family discussion. The meticulously manicured lawn and cheerful flower beds outside felt like a cruel joke, a veneer of perfection designed to hide the rot beneath. Inside, the usual warmth of family gatherings was replaced by a sterile, almost ceremonial arrangement. My parents sat side by side on the sofa, a united front, their expressions a carefully curated blend of concern and mild disapproval. David was perched on an armchair opposite them, feigning an air of wounded innocence, while Melissa sat beside him, eyes darting, a subtle smirk playing on her lips that she quickly masked with a sympathetic frown when she caught my gaze. The living room, usually a hub of comfortable chaos, had been transformed into a perfectly staged tribunal, an arena where I was clearly meant to be judged. My mother, ever the orchestrator of appearances, rose to greet me with a hug that felt more like a cage than an embrace. "Emma, darling, thank goodness you're here. We've all been so worried. How are you feeling after everything?" Her eyes flickered towards David. A silent signal. "You look a little tired, dear. The surgery really took a toll, didn't it?" Her words, cloaked in concern, were a thinly veiled attempt to establish the narrative. I was fragile, emotional, perhaps even irrational due to my recent procedure. I offered a polite, practiced smile. "I'm perfectly fine, Mom. Thank you for asking." My voice was steady, betraying none of the volcanic anger churning beneath my calm exterior. I chose an armchair a slight distance from David and Melissa, creating a physical boundary to match the emotional chasm. David cleared his throat, leaning forward, his voice dripping with feigned sympathy. "Emma, honey, we're just concerned. All these changes, freezing accounts, locking me out of our home. It's not like you, and after your surgery, you're particularly vulnerable, aren't you? Melissa's just devastated by your sudden coldness." His tone was laced with condescension, a paternalistic concern that grated on my nerves, but I kept my face impassive. Melissa nodded vigorously, a single tear welling in her eye, a masterful performance of injured innocence. "I don't understand what I've done, Emma," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I simply met their gazes, one by one. My parents, then David, then Melissa. I didn't interrupt, didn't raise my voice, didn't offer a single excuse or defense. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, a vacuum where their rehearsed accusations were meant to find fertile ground, but they found none. My unwavering calm seemed to disarm them, their initial confidence wavering under the weight of my silent resolve. Their discomfort grew, palpable in the strained smiles and fidgeting hands. They expected tears, an outburst, a confession of guilt. Instead, they got an unmoving wall. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with unspoken truths and mounting apprehension. They thought they had set the stage for my downfall. But as I settled deeper into my armchair, my hands resting calmly in my lap, I knew I was simply waiting for my cue. The show, I thought, was about to begin. My cue arrived, not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet click of a digital picture frame I'd carefully retrieved from my bag. The small, unassuming device, passed around countless family dinners with cheerful holiday snaps, now held a very different kind of image. I turned it on, the screen glowing, and placed it on the coffee table directly between my parents and David, angled for maximum visibility. The first image flashed into stark relief. David and Melissa, naked, entangled in my time's bed, the familiar floral duvet rumpled beneath them. Then the next, a slightly different angle, undeniable in its intimacy. Then another, a collective gasp, sharp and visceral, tore through the carefully constructed calm of the room. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror I had never seen before. My father's usually placid face contorted in disbelief, his gaze darting from the screen to David, Then to Melissa, David's carefully maintained facade shattered instantly. He lunged forward, his hand outstretched, a desperate guttural sound escaping his throat. "No, Emma, what is this? These are fake. Photoshopped. She's unstable, Mom. Dad. She's making this up." His voice was a panicked roar, laced with genuine terror, the bravado of moments before completely gone. His face, once so composed, was now a mask of frantic denial, sweat beading on his forehead. Melissa, whose single tear had dried, now recoiled as if struck. Her eyes, which moments ago had held a subtle smirk, were wide with a raw, exposed fear. "Emma, how could you? It's a misunderstanding. You don't understand what you're doing." Her voice was shrill, lacking the practiced tremor she'd used earlier. Now purely a desperate plea, she turned to my parents, her own performance now crumbling. "It's not what it looks like. She's making it seem worse." I didn't react. I simply watched, a silent observer to their unraveling. My composure, honed by Olivia's relentless training, was my armor. The digital frame continued to cycle through the images, each one a fresh stab at their lies, a concrete, irrefutable truth displayed for all to see. The silence that had preceded my entrance had been replaced by a cacophony of their panicked accusations and sputtering excuses, but I allowed none of it to penetrate my calm. My parents sat frozen, their gazes fixed on the images, then on their son-in-law and daughter. The dawning horror was visible on their faces. The realization that the saccharine narrative they had so carefully cultivated for years was now being ripped to shreds before their very eyes. The tableau of perfection, the illusion of their happy, functional family, was collapsing. "Those are old, from a long time ago," David stammered, his eyes darting wildly, seeking any lifeline. "Emma, you know Melissa was having trouble. She needed comfort. It was a mistake, a momentary lapse." He tried to grab the frame again, but I subtly shifted my foot, nudging it just out of his reach. A momentary lapse that apparently required a photo shoot from multiple angles? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yet it cut through his frantic shouts with a chilling precision. I didn't need to raise it. The evidence spoke for me. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. The tribunal they had convened, the judgment they sought to render, had become my courtroom. My quiet strength, my unwavering gaze, dominated the shattered space. Their frantic denials, their desperate attempts to discredit me, only served to amplify the damning clarity of the images. The photographs, simple and stark, had indeed spoken 1,000 words, and every single one condemned them. Their desperate pleas died down, leaving an echoing silence in the room, heavy with their fresh shame. It was then, as their frantic denials faded into whimpers, that I slowly retrieved David's tablet from my bag. The glowing screen, still displaying the title, "The Plan," felt like a living, breathing entity in my hands. I placed it gently on the coffee table, next to the now static digital picture frame, ensuring everyone could see the stark, incriminating words. "What you've just seen," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick silence, "was just the tip of the iceberg. A casual indiscretion perhaps, if not for what accompanied it. A calculated, methodical scheme to systematically strip me of everything I owned, everything I had worked for." I watched their faces, the initial horror on my parents' faces, now deepening into confusion, while David and Melissa exchanged a terrified glance, a silent acknowledgement of the deeper treachery I was about to unveil. I tapped the screen, scrolling down the document. "This, David, Melissa, is your masterpiece, The Plan. Let me share some of its more enlightening passages." I took a deep breath, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle. Before I began to read, each word a hammer blow against their collapsing fortress of lies. Asterisk asterisk. Phase 1. Emma's inheritance integration. Objective: Persuade Emma to invest her recent inheritance approx. $300K into our apartment mortgage acceleration program. Frame as securing our future. Target completion. End of Q2. Asterisk asterisk. I paused, looking directly at my parents. Remember how David was so insistent I put my inheritance into the mortgage? How he spoke of our future? My father paled, his eyes widening as the pieces began to fit. David, meanwhile, was now breathing in short, shallow gasps, his face draining of all color. He tried to speak, but only a choked gurgle escaped. I continued, relentless. Asterisk asterisk. Phase 2. Salary diversion. Objective. Encourage Emma to accept promotion, increasing her net income. Strategically suggest using new salary to cover household expenses. Allowing David's income to be reinvested into joint ventures, for example, shell accounts divided by investments in Melissa's name. Target completion, Q3. Asterisk asterisk. My gaze flickered to Melissa, whose own face was now a mask of ashen terror. Her carefully constructed facade had disintegrated, revealing the raw fear beneath. My new promotion? David's invested income? Melissa's investments? I articulated, each word a slow, deliberate accusation. And finally, I said, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper, the ultimate objective. Asterisk. Asterisk. Phase 3. Equity extraction. Objective. Upon full mortgage payment using Emma's funds, initiate divorce proceedings. Leverage Emma's emotional instability post-surgery, divided by a fair discovery, if necessary, to minimize her claim to apartment equity. Target outcome. David retains 75% of apartment value. Emma's inheritance effectively absorbed. Melissa's bonus structure contingent on successful execution. Asterisk asterisk. The words hung in the air, cold and deadly. David let out a sound that was half sob, half whimper, rising slightly from his armchair, his hands clutched to his head. No, Emma, please, stop, this isn't... It's not real, it was just... ideas. I would never... He was pleading now, truly pleading. His eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic fear. Not of losing me, but of utter, public financial ruin. He dropped back into his seat. A broken man, the arrogant, calculating charmer was gone, replaced by a panicked, pathetic wreck. Melissa remained utterly silent, her eyes fixed on the tablet screen, then on David's crumbling form. Her earlier tears were long forgotten, replaced by a hollow, icy stare, not of remorse, but of profound, self-serving defeat. Her complicity, her active participation in this meticulous fraud, was now undeniably exposed, not by my words alone, but by her own carefully documented treachery. There was no more playing the victim, no more innocent sister, just the stark, brutal truth of who she was. My parents, witnessing the complete breakdown of their son-in-law, and the stunned, guilty silence of their daughter, were utterly devastated. My mother had buried her face in my father's shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. My father, his face etched with unspeakable pain and shame, simply stared at the tablet, then at David, then at Melissa. The air was thick with the stench of their deception, a sickening weight that crushed any remaining illusion of family harmony. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an annihilation. The final, crushing blow had been delivered, and their meticulously constructed world of lies had finally, irrevocably, imploded. My mother's silent sobs intensified, echoing the profound collapse of our family's carefully curated facade. My father, his face etched with unspeakable shame, finally lifted his head, his gaze sweeping from the incriminating tablet to David's pathetic, cowering form, then to Melissa's frozen, defeated stare. No words were needed from me. The silence spoke volumes, heavier than any accusation. David. My father's voice was a raw, strained whisper, utterly devoid of its usual authority. Get out. Get out of my house. Now. David, still slumped, could only manage a choked sound, a pathetic whimper. He looked utterly broken, not by remorse, but by the shattering of his grand design. Melissa, on the other hand, remained immobile, a statue carved from complicity and shock. Her eyes, usually so adept at feigning innocence, were now vacant, stripped of all artifice. She glanced at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw, not regret, but a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred. My mother, pulling away from my father's shoulder, turned to me, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Emma," she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. How could we have been so blind?" She extended a shaky hand, reaching for mine. This is unforgivable, what they've done to you." My father, too, turned, his gaze meeting mine. A silent plea for understanding, perhaps for forgiveness. In their own unwitting enablement, the air was thick with their belated remorse. A realization that had come far too late, but had arrived nonetheless. "There is nothing to say," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic shifts happening within me. "The truth speaks for itself." I looked from my parents to David and Melissa, my gaze unwavering. "My intent is clear. There will be a divorce, and it will be swift and absolute. David, you will get nothing from our shared assets. Your plan ensures that. Melissa, our relationship, as sisters, as family, is over, permanently. And to any other member of this family who enabled this, who gaslighted me, who dismissed my concerns for the sake of peace or appearances, consider this a severance. I am done. I am done with the lies, done with the manipulation, and done with the toxic dynamic that allowed this to fester." David finally managed to push himself to his feet, his body trembling, his eyes pleading. "Emma, please, we can fix this. It was a mistake." "Melissa," she got into my head, "you know how she is. Just don't tell the police. I'll give you everything. Just don't ruin me." His voice cracked. A pathetic, desperate plea. "You ruined yourself, David," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "And you, Melissa, chose your path. Now, you will both live with the consequences." I didn't wait for a response, didn't allow their desperate appeals to penetrate. I rose from the armchair, my movements slow and deliberate. A profound sense of closure settling over me. My parents moved towards me, their faces etched with a grief that mirrored my own, but for different reasons. My mother reached out, embracing me tightly, a silent apology in her hug. My father simply placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, an acknowledgement of my strength. Walking towards the front door, I felt an immense burden lift from my shoulders, the weight of years of unspoken truths, of suppressed anger, finally gone. The house, once a symbol of idyllic family gatherings, now felt like a liberated space. I didn't look back at David or Melissa, their defeated figures fading into the background of a life I was now consciously choosing to leave behind. The air outside, though cold, felt crisp and clean, tasting of freedom and a profound, hard-won self-respect. Each step away from that house was a step towards a future I would build on my own terms, free from deceit, free from betrayal, and finally, truly my own. That freedom, hard-won and still fragile, now demanded action, and the legal machinery, once set in motion by Olivia, moved with a satisfying, if at times surreal, swiftness. David's lawyers, initially blustering with threats of countersuits and accusations of Emma's emotional instability, fell silent the moment Olivia presented the plan. The meticulous, cold calculations laid out in David's own words, coupled with the photographic evidence, formed an unassailable fortress around my case. The courtroom, usually a stage for legal theatrics, became a silent arena where David's carefully constructed world imploded. His face, during the summary hearing, was a mask of utter devastation, stripped of all arrogance. There were no negotiations, no lengthy battles over assets, due to the undeniable evidence of premeditated financial fraud. His claim to any marital assets was rendered null and void. He left with nothing but his shame and the clothes on his back. A hollow victory for him. An absolute vindication for me. The apartment, the one we'd shared, was solely mine to dispose of, cutting ties with Melissa. And by extension, the parts of my family who continued to enable her and dismiss my truth, was a more visceral process. An emotional amputation. There was a quiet grief for the sister I had once loved. The bond I had nourished. The dreams I had held for our shared future. It felt like mourning a phantom limb, the pain of its absence, the memory of its presence, lingering even as I knew it was diseased and had to be severed for my survival. My parents, after the initial shock and their heartfelt apologies, tried, for a time, to bridge the gap with Melissa, but her unrepentant silence, her refusal to acknowledge her complicity, solidified my resolve. I couldn't rebuild a life around people who prioritized a false sense of family peace over my well-being and dignity. The emails, the occasional texts, the attempts at checking in from other family members who still didn't quite grasp the depth of the betrayal, were met with polite but firm boundaries, or simply silence. It wasn't born of anger anymore, but of a profound, self-protective peace. Each severed tie, though laced with a pang of sorrow, brought an overwhelming sense of liberation, a lightness I hadn't realized I was missing. The decision to sell the apartment wasn't just practical. It was a sacred act of purging. Every room, every corner, held ghosts of betrayal, echoes of a life built on a lie. Walking through it one last time, before the real estate agent took over, was like performing an exorcism. I saw David's discarded golf clubs, Melissa's favorite teacup still on a shelf, and felt nothing but a cold, liberating detachment. It wasn't my home anymore, it was a crime scene, and I needed to leave it behind. The sale was quicker than I anticipated. A clean break. A final financial severing from the past. The weight of that space, of those tainted memories, lifted the moment the papers were signed. Then came the exciting search for a new apartment, a true blank canvas. This wasn't just about finding four walls and a roof, it was about defining my new chapter. Curating a space that resonated with my reclaimed self. I explored neighborhoods I'd always admired but never considered. Viewed properties that felt expansive and bright. I imagined quiet evenings, inviting friends, cultivating hobbies that had long been dormant. I wasn't looking for a bigger place, or a fancier one, but one that felt inherently times mine *, imbued with light and possibility. When I finally found it, a spacious, airy apartment with large windows overlooking a vibrant community garden, I knew it wasn't just a dwelling, it was a promise. A promise of new beginnings, of peace, and a future built entirely on my own terms, free from the shadows of deceit. The pristine walls of my new apartment were a blank slate, not just for paint colors, but for a new narrative. Settling into this space, bathed in the soft morning light from windows overlooking the community garden, wasn't just unpacking boxes. It was an act of deliberate creation. Each piece of furniture, each framed photograph I chose to display, was a conscious statement about the woman I was becoming. Not the woman I had been. The echoes of betrayal, though still present, were fainter here. Diluted by the fresh air and the promise of undisturbed mornings. My journey of healing began not with a grand gesture, but with small, consistent acts of self-care. I found a therapist, a kind and insightful woman named Dr. Evelyn, who helped me unravel the complex knots of grief, anger, and ingrained patterns of people-pleasing that had allowed David and Melissa to exploit me. Therapy wasn't just about processing trauma. It was about excavating Emma from beneath years of emotional debris. I started painting again, a passion I'd abandoned in the busy hum of my old life. Feeling the vibrant colors bleed across the canvas. A visceral release of emotions I couldn't yet articulate. I joined a book club at the local community center, finding camaraderie and intellectual stimulation with women who knew nothing of my past, allowing me to forge connections based purely on shared interests and authentic conversation. The gym, once a chore, became a sanctuary, each rep a testament to my physical and mental resilience. Rebuilding my body as I rebuilt my life. Olivia, of course, remained my steadfast rock, celebrating my small victories and offering unwavering support. But beyond her, I began to cultivate a new, authentic support system. My colleagues at work, who had only known the competent, focused Emma post-trauma, became genuine friends. We'd grab lunch, share stories, and their respect for my work, unburdened by any knowledge of my personal drama, felt incredibly validating. The women from my book club, initially strangers, became trusted confidants, their diverse perspectives, helping me see my own experiences in new lights. This new circle wasn't defined by blood or history, but by mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection, a stark contrast to the transactional and manipulative relationships I had severed. It was at a local charity gala, a silent auction event I attended with Olivia, that I met James. He wasn't overtly charismatic like David, nor did he possess Melissa's fragile allure. James was quiet, thoughtful, with eyes that genuinely saw you when he spoke. He was an architect, passionate about sustainable design, and utterly devoid of pretense. We spoke for hours about art, urban planning, and the subtle beauty of overlooked details. There was an ease about him, a respectful curiosity that immediately put me at ease. He didn't push, didn't pry, and when I eventually, cautiously, shared snippets of my past, he listened without judgment, offered comfort without pity, and crucially, understood the value of my newfound solitude as much as my desire for connection. He brought me flowers not to make an apology, but simply because he'd seen a bloom that reminded him of a painting I'd admired. He remembered small details from our conversations, showing a genuine attentiveness I hadn't realized I'd starved for. His honesty was disarming, his humor gentle, and his respect for my space and my story was a healing balm. With James, love felt like a quiet, sturdy foundation being laid, brick by honest brick, rather than a volatile edifice constantly threatening to collapse. As I navigated these new waters, surrounded by genuine connections and the quiet, steady rhythm of my own life, I felt a deep, profound peace begin to settle within me. It wasn't the absence of memory, but the presence of growth. A knowing that from the wreckage, I was building something real, authentic, and undeniably my own. My journey was far from over, but the path ahead, forged by my own choices and illuminated by self-respect, stretched out with a quiet promise. That profound inner quiet, the sense of being undeniably whole, was not a destination I had simply arrived at, but a landscape I had meticulously rebuilt from the ruins. This was the truest form of peace, a knowing forged in fire, built on the bedrock of rediscovered self-worth. My intuition, once a dismissed whisper, was now a resonant guide, and boundaries, once a foreign concept, stood as unyielding fortifications around my reclaimed spirit. The methodical strategy Olivia and I had honed wasn't just about dismantling their scheme. It was about constructing my own unshakable resilience, proving that true power lay in calm, calculated action, not reactive fury. My journey, born from such bitter origins, had indeed led me to a life far richer, more authentic. The world had shattered, yes, but from the fragments, I had painstakingly built something stronger, with clearer vision and an unshakable sense of self. The scars were there, a testament to battles won, a map of resilience, reminding me not of what was lost, but of the incredible strength I possessed to reclaim everything. This profound personal growth, emerging from the darkest adversity, had led to a truer, happier life than I could have ever imagined before the storm. This is my truth, and it can be yours. You too possess that incredible strength, to face the darkest corners, to set your boundaries, to trust your quiet knowing, and to meticulously, courageously, rebuild your world on your own terms. This is Emma, finding her peace. I hope you find yours. What will be your first step?